Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7 here on Broadcasting Scotland. My name's Kenny McBride and I'm joined this evening by two excellent guests. Firstly, from the Keep Scotland the Brand campaign, Ruth Watson. Ruth, how are you doing today?
I'm good, thanks. Yourself?
I'm not bad at all. And on the other side, the MP for Inverclyde and also the chair of the all-party parliamentary group on gambling-related harm, which we'll be discussing a wee bit later, Ronnie Cowan. Ronnie, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, Kenny. Nice to see you.
Grand. Well, it's good to have both of you here. And we start this evening, as we always do, with our coronavirus statistics update. So as of 2 p.m. today, a total of 1,049,800 people in Scotland have been tested through NHS Scotland labs and UK government regional testing centres. Of these, 974,613 were confirmed negative, 75,187 were positive. There were 832 new confirmed cases of COVID-19 in Scotland today, and sadly 39 new reported deaths. This will of course be an underestimate of the total number of cases, as not everyone with the virus will display symptoms and not everyone will necessarily get themselves tested. As always, we urge you, if you're showing symptoms of a new dry persistent cough, a fever, or a change in your sense of taste or smell, then please do book a test as soon as you can. Of the people who have tested positive, 1,239 people were in hospital last night, 102 of whom were in intensive care. And the number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the coronavirus infection now stands at 3,079. This number only includes those who have died in hospital, having received a positive test for the virus. And we don't actually have up-to-date figures for the UK today, as there's been a delay in publishing them. But we do have the latest from the Office for National Statistics, covering deaths in England and Wales for the week ending the 30th of October, which was week 44 of the year. This shows 1,258 deaths involving COVID-19 in England during that week, and 121 in Wales. Both these figures represent an increase of just under 50% from the previous week. However, UK daily reporting shows 1,366 COVID-related deaths in England during that week. This is the 8th consecutive week in which COVID-related deaths have increased in England and Wales. For the second week in a row, the report shows deaths in hospitals above the 5-year average. Deaths in private homes also stayed well above average, but deaths in care homes were below average for the first time in several weeks. And this report brings the total number of deaths linked to COVID-19 in England and Wales to 56,698 up to the 30th of October. And before we get on to the rest of tonight's headlines, if you would like to join the conversation here on Scotland at 7, you can do so on Twitter by following us at Broadcast Scot and using the hashtag Scotland at 7. As you can see, we'll be flashing some of these tweets up on the screen throughout the show, so do please get in touch if you've got anything to add to any of our stories tonight. But our first story, 3 council areas are to move up a protection level as cases of coronavirus continue to rise in those areas. Fife, Perth and Kinross and Angus local authority areas will move from level 2, where they have been since the new level system was announced, to level 3, with the change coming into effect from 6 a.m. this Friday, the 13th of November. All other local authority protection levels are unchanged. Within level 1, those living in Shetland, Orkney and the Western Isles will, from Friday, be able to meet one other household inside their homes, up to a maximum of 6 people. Guidance will be issued for anyone who travels to the mainland to avoid in-home socialising for a period after their return. Speaking in Parliament this afternoon, First Minister Nicola Sturgeon said there was no immediate requirement to move any local authorities into level 4, the highest level, but said that this was being kept under strict review. The First Minister again stressed the importance of travel restrictions in bringing down the infection rate of the virus. Those in levels 3 and 4 should not travel outside their local authority area unless travelling for essential reasons such as work, healthcare or caring responsibilities, while those in a level 1 or 2 area should not be going into a level 3 or 4 council area except for those same essential purposes. She added that these will remain in guidance over the next week, but preparation for regulations will continue in the event they are required to be put into law. So I'll come to you first on this, Ruth. What do you make of this change in the regulations or change in the categorization of a few areas today, and just the way this new levels framework is working so far?
I live in Angus, so we're going to be going up a grade. And I was actually really shocked to hear that the percentage that the rate had gone up by 47.5%. That seems to me pretty good reason to try and tighten things up a bit. My daughter lives in Dundee, and my eldest daughter lives in Dundee, and my son in Stirling. So they've already been living in the tougher and tighter restrictions. And it's not as bad as full lockdown. So it's let's let's keep the heat, folks. Let's just do what we need to do to try and get out this in one piece. I feel really bad for those folk who are struggling because of work and because of social isolation. And I know that my son's been finding it really tough. It's his first year at uni, and he isn't meeting folk. He's having to make that transition in different kinds of learning style, that you go from school to university. He's having to do all that online. Uh, my family's got sort of first-hand understanding of what it's like to have somebody going from being part of a busy household to feeling quite isolated, and having to face up to some of those challenges. Um, but we're really lucky because at the moment we're sort of, getting by. Although my husband had a long period of unemployment, and I think that there's an awful lot of people are just gritting their teeth. But yes, if it means that my youngest daughter can continue going to school, if it means that we can try and function without complete fear of getting ill. And my younger brother almost died twice earlier this year with COVID. And actually, I've got family in Algeria, and just heard that one of my cousins has died from COVID. That helps give you perspective, and the long haul. It just, I really feel for all those people who are struggling, and it is a struggle for a lot of folk. But I think that if those extra measures mean that we can come out of this in one piece at the other end, then we can pick up those pieces and move forward. You can't pick up the pieces if you're in the ground.
And Ronnie, how are you feeling about the way this new system is working? Do you think people are, as Ruth is, kind of accepting that this is just what needs to be done?
I think the vast majority of people do. The vast majority of people get it. There's a temptation to simply say, let's go straight to level 4, put across the entire country, kill off this virus, stop it, and there's an argument for that. But what we're trying to do at the same time is protect as many jobs as we possibly can. Try and nurse the economy through this. So we've taken a different approach to it and tried to identify and target areas, and so we've got these 4 or 5 different levels that we can move through. When we first moved into this new system of levels, Inverclyde, my constituency, was put into level 3 along with the surrounding areas, and there was a bit of an argument where people were saying, well, actually, our figures suggest that we could be in level 2, but the bigger picture was that numbers were starting to increase again. So the sensible thing to do is go straight to level 3 and try and maintain it there. The figures that have been released over the last week or so have made that the right decision. I've proven that to be the right decision. We've gone up from 85 per 100,000 to 166 per 100,000 in Inverclyde in the last week. It's a 119% increase in cases, so obviously the virus is still on the increase. And while it's doing that, we have to take those actions. We don't really have a choice in the matter, or well, I suppose we do. The choice would be to try to run wild through our communities, and a lot more people would contract it, a lot more people would die. And beyond that, the level of pressure that we would put on our NHS, with more nurses getting it, more doctors getting it, more anaesthetists and the physiotherapists and all the people that work in the health service, and then you get into our third sector, we get the fire service and the police. If they're as heavily affected by this as could possibly happen, the whole system would simply collapse. And I know people quite rightly are saying, I'm due chemotherapy or kidney dialysis, and I'm worried about that happening. If the system gets to a point where it can no longer support itself, then all of that will go. And we have to make sure that we're in a situation now where we protect the frontline workers as much as we possibly can. So we're
Yeah.
trying to do that in a rational fashion, in a controlled fashion. But it's tough. It's really tough on individuals, and it's hard for people to accept that. We all get that, but we've got to start thinking, protect our community, look after our families, look after our loved ones. And now with the announcement of a vaccine, that has to be that glimpse of light at the end of a very long tunnel. And we look towards that thinking there's a possibility now, which a week ago we weren't hearing about. There's a possibility now that come the beginning of next year, there could be a vaccine, and then we've got to start thinking about how do we roll that out to get to the frontline workers first, how do we get that through our communities, how do we make sure that people are good, because it's going to be a 2 injection programme over the course of 5 weeks. So that's going to be a complicated thing to get out there, and we've got to make sure people accept it, because there will also be the anti-vaxxers who don't want to do it, the conspiracy theorists. So it's a long, hard journey we've been on. It's this majority of this year, and it's going to continue through into the spring of next year. But hopefully there's a sign there of recovery, a sign of things which can get us out of this situation. But we've got to march towards that in a responsible manner, or we risk a massive second wave throughout the winter, which will kill a lot of people. So if we can get through that, minimise the damage, then hopefully a vaccine in the new year will put an end to this for us.
Well, we move on now, and Liz Truss's Department for International Trade is scrambling to meet a Wednesday deadline for tabling £80 billion worth of trade agreements before Parliament, in time for them to come into force in January. Truss's department has signed a string of continuity agreements to ensure the UK can go on trading with non-EU countries on similar terms when the Brexit transition period comes to an end on the 31st of December. Under the Constitutional Reform and Governance Act, passed in 2010, international treaties have to be laid before Parliament for 21 sitting days before they can be ratified. With Parliament due to rise for Christmas on the 17th of December, as of this Thursday, only 21 sitting days remain before the new year. The department published parliamentary reports on 2 deals with Ukraine and the Ivory Coast yesterday, and details of the Japan deal struck last month have also already been published for MPs to scrutinise. But talks are not yet completed with 15 countries, including Canada, Turkey and Singapore. So, Ronnie, on this one, it's just another case of Brexit preparations all seemingly being left to the last minute, isn't it?
It's, if it wasn't, if it didn't have the potential to do the damage that it's going to do, it would almost be laughable. How many years now have we been looking at this, and the government's attitude, and I've said it many times before, has always been it will be all right on the night. When we get there, we'll work things out. Well, as you pointed out there, the timetable we've now got in front of us, we're sort of there now. We need to have those deals on the table because of the process of actually getting them ratified. And they simply haven't done it. And what continues to amaze me is the fact that they belligerently progress with this with the attitude of that we actually know what we're doing and it's going to be okay, just trust us, don't worry about it. And I am worried sick about it, to be honest, because 80 billion quid's worth of trade deals. We struck a deal, as you said, was it yesterday, the day before, with the Ivory Coast. That's not going to replace the deals we had within the EU in any way, shape, or form. And we've now got a timetable, and it's even laughable that we're saying to ourselves, it's going to be done with this timetable because Parliament's going to rise the 17th of December. Well, stop. Well, Parliament does not have to rise on the 17th of December. If we have to be attending Parliament or voting in Parliament or doing what we're going to do over that period, we should be, as parliamentarians, we should be committing ourselves to that now. Because if it's the last 24 hours the deals are done, then they have to be done. But put yourself, I would always put myself in the shoes of the other people. You've got Canada, Singapore that you mentioned, maybe looking to do deals, but they know absolutely now the ball is absolutely in their court. They are in complete control of any negotiations because they know that clock is ticking and they know the desperate measures we've got ourselves into. So put yourself in their situation. They're going to play tough. They're going to push us right down the wire. They don't need to do these deals. So they've got us over a barrel, and it's the UK government's responsibility, and they've had years to do this. But one of the things at the very beginning of this, if I remember right, was David Davis when he was in charge of all of this before whoever else replaced him and then replaced him and then replaced him. He said nothing's agreed until everything's agreed. That was the biggest mistake he could have made. Because we're in that situation now where we're grasping anything that will come our way, any deals that are going. And what we should have been doing was getting the major chunks in place from day one and then trying to fill in the details as we went along. But we thought we could play hardball with the EU. We've lost out on that. And now we think we can play hardball with these other countries who don't have to do the deals. The clock is ticking. And in any economic environment where any companies and any countries are looking to put a deal, they want to create the best deal for them. That's their job. They want to look after their country. They want to make sure that the deal that they get with the United Kingdom favours them. And we're in that situation where we've left ourselves no room for negotiation. And this figure of £80 billion has been bandied around for a good number of years now, and we've hardly scratched the surface with it. So we've got ourselves. I listened to a little bit of. I was doing other things today, but I listened to a little bit of what Liz Truss was saying today, and it was just words which are getting bantered around with no substance behind them. And if that's all we've got, then when we're on the table with those countries, they're going to absolutely slaughter us.
Well, we move on now to another Brexit-related story. As expected, the House of Lords last night voted to reject several clauses in the UK government's internal market bill. The vote stripped out clauses which would see the UK breach its obligations under the EU withdrawal agreement and could threaten the Good Friday Agreement, which has secured peace in Northern Ireland for the last 20 years. The government has expressed its disappointment with the defeat and has said it will restore the clauses when the bill returns to the Commons, then force the bill past the Lords on the grounds that it was a firm manifesto commitment at the last election. Cabinet Secretary for the Constitution, Europe and External Affairs, Michael Russell, said, "This vote is a further confirmation that the UK government must drop its deeply flawed internal market bill. Not only is the bill a flagrant breach of international law, it also fundamentally undermines devolution. The EU has made it clear the clauses which flout the withdrawal agreement are unacceptable. If the UK government insists on reinstating them, they face condemning Scotland and the UK to a no-deal Brexit. But we should not forget that the Internal Market Bill is also an unprecedented threat to the Scottish Parliament's powers and the UK's constitutional rules, and it should be rejected on those grounds as well." So Ruth, coming to you on this, it's I imagine not often you've got anything good to say about the House of Lords, but so moments like this, it does serve some purpose, doesn't it?
I found myself agreeing with Michael Howard today. That is what 2020 is. You look at it and you think the current Conservative Party is now so far to the right that Michael Howard could be considered a centrist. That's actually, for a political nerd, a politics nerd as I am, that's pretty big. If you're looking at the range of political figures in the Lords talking about the damage that the internal market does constitutionally, democratically and legally, I can't begin to imagine the brazenness that goes into a parliamentarian who keeps on trying to push it back. It's like the ghost of Steve Bannon is haunting Parliament. That there's just this whole, I can't help feeling that there's this the sort of the disruptors agenda, the sort of the dark hand of Dominic Cummings, and it is so beyond logic, it is so beyond the law, it is so beyond anything to do with diplomacy that you really wonder what it is that's going on in Number 10 and around the cabinet, because it doesn't seem to be anything that there's nothing that I can logically look at and go, this makes sense. That's the plan. It's going to be brilliant. Because it's not. Liz Truss spends most of her waking days talking utter mince. I don't think the woman has taken 1 minute to look through any of the trade deals that she's talking about before you can start congratulating yourself and punting out nonsense about soya sauce, which is a lie in the first place. All credibility is gone. You look at the farming and the fisheries leaders in Scotland, and they have been pounding the announcements coming out. The generally compliant NFU is has got the bit between its teeth, and you're looking at it thinking, you've got the farming leaders in the food and drink industry today wrote an excoriating letter saying, "Give us more time. We need to have more time." We don't even have any of our hauliers able to. Not one of them has got a license, or at least the last time I checked, not one of them has got a license to be able to export onto the mainland of the continent.
Hmm.
And before we're talking about okay, so the internal market bill, it is massive. It's got everything to do with our food and drink standards. It's got to do with our being forced to sell Scotland's NHS. All these aspects, which are pretty horrific. I can understand why if I was living in Boris Johnson's head, perish of thought. If I can understand why it makes sense from Westminster's point of view to do this. It makes sense to be able to sort of control everybody and everything. Democratically, it makes no sense. But we're looking at this COVID vaccine coming in, all this fantastic news. There's 40 million hits. But there's a very interesting bit of semantic. Any time this government puts out information, hold it up to the light to scrutinise it. Matt Hancock today was talking about, well, we're near the front of the queue. I suspect that means that we're behind the rest of the European Union member states. But
Mm.
add to that this highly sensitive vaccine that has to come across the channel and has to be kept under very strict conditions to be able to still to be viable. And then we're looking at the prospect of it being held up in customs checks for 3 days. Yeah, I mean, the whole thing. I think that we are looking at an abyss that we have been warned about many times, and yay, go Michael Howard.
Hmm. Well, that's, as you say, Ruth, probably the first time we've ever heard those words said on Broadcasting Scotland. So well done. We move on now, though, and John Major last night suggested that the UK should offer Scotland 2 referendums, one to begin negotiations and one to confirm the negotiated settlement, as a way to avoid increasing support for independence by refusing to agree a process involving a Section 30 order. The former Prime Minister was giving a lecture on what he called the unforgivable consequences of Brexit when he made the proposal, saying the purpose of the second referendum would be that Scottish electors would know what they were voting for and be able to compare it to what they now have. This did not happen with Brexit. Had it done so, there may have been no Brexit, he said. SNP Westminster Deputy Leader Kirsten Oswald said the remarks should be a wake-up call to Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Oswald said Johnson's anti-democratic stance on an independence referendum was straight out of the Trump playbook. Scottish Secretary Alistair Jack claimed last week that the Tory government would not agree to a second referendum for a generation, saying, "Is it 25 years or is it 40 years? You tell me. But it's certainly not 6 years nor 10. So, Ronnie, come to you on this one. Do you think John Major's idea will fly? Do you think anybody in Whitehall is listening to John Major and thinking that sounds like a good idea?
No. I mean, John Major's pitch on this is, if we do it this way, then Scotland will vote to remain in the UK. It's not let the democratic voice be heard. It's not this is a good way to get a better understanding of what's required and let people vote on it. It's do it this way and Scotland will stay in the UK. So he's not using a referendum as a lever for democracy. He's using referendums, or referendi, whatever the word is, as a lever to keep Scotland in the United Kingdom. I mean, the phrase he said, which you partially quoted there, was for the second referendum. The second referendum. The first was only on the principle. Well, all referendums are advisory. The second referendum, he once says, Scottish electorate would know what they were voting for and be able to compare it to what they now have. Well, I kind of thought we already knew that. I kind of thought all these years of debate and engagement in Scottish society is we knew what we're voting for. We understand it. We do not need to be told by the Westminster Mandarins, ex and present, what we are voting for in an independent Scotland. We will vote for what we want and we will design what we want for our country. Thank you very much. We don't need John Major at this stage in his career stepping in and telling us what we should be thinking and what we should be voting on. You know, it's yet another uh, contribution to the debate, which is completely unwarranted. I don't know how much he got paid for the speech he was giving. He must have something to say at the time, but it's completely unnecessary. It's completely off kilter. And just to go back to that point, which gets repeated and repeated and repeated, it's a once in a generation thing. The exact quote was, "In my opinion, and it's only my opinion, it's a once in a generation." That was the quote which has been taken and used and mugged. It doesn't appear in any legal document. It doesn't appear in any agreement. It was never signed up to. It was one opinion at the time, and it was only one opinion. Well, I've got my opinion. You've got your opinion. We've all got our opinion. My opinion is when the people of Scotland demand this referendum, the people of Scotland should have this referendum.
Well, we cross the Atlantic now to some other democratic questions. And the US Attorney General, William Barr, has authorized federal prosecutors to begin investigating substantial allegations of voter irregularities across the country, in a stark break with long-standing practice and despite a lack of evidence of any fraud having been committed. The intervention of Barr, who has frequently been accused of politicizing the Department of Justice, comes as Donald Trump refuses to concede defeat and promotes a number of legally meritless lawsuits aimed at casting doubt on the legitimacy of the election. Joe Biden was confirmed as president-elect on Saturday after he won the critical battleground state of Pennsylvania. Barr wrote on Monday to US attorneys, giving them the green light to pursue substantial allegations of voting and vote tabulation irregularities before the results of the presidential election in their jurisdictions are certified. As Barr himself admits in his letter, such a move by federal prosecutors to intervene in the thick of an election has traditionally been frowned upon, with the view being that investigations into possible fraud should only be carried out after the race is completed. But Barr, who was appointed by Trump in February 2019, pours scorn on such an approach, denouncing it as a passive and delayed enforcement approach. The contentious action, which was first reported by Associated Press, was greeted with delight by Trump supporters, but with skepticism from lawyers and election experts. Within hours of the news, the New York Times reported that the Justice Department official overseeing voter fraud investigations, Richard Pilger, had resigned from his position. So, Ruth, coming to you on this one, we knew Donald Trump probably wouldn't go without a fight, but do you think any of these lawsuits, any of these investigations that Bill Barr has ordered now, do you think any of them are going to come to anything?
I very much doubt it. Watching the pundits talking about it, there seems to be fairly universal, amongst sensible people, fairly universal horror and a widespread skepticism that what Trump's trying to do is to, like Samson, pull the temple down around him. I think that the prospect of several multi-million dollar, hundreds of millions of dollars lawsuits against him, the prospect potentially of being done for tax fraud and a wee stint in the big house on prisoner and cell block T, I think that may well be focusing his mind. There are those who are saying that there is another issue, which is that with the Senate elections coming up in January in Georgia and a couple of other states, that he may be trying to muddy those waters in order to give Republicans more of a chance. And there's a huge issue. There's a huge issue with the suppression of voters in particular areas, and predominantly voters from the black communities, African American communities, and this is an historic system. The Electoral College was set up to favour white landowners after slavery and sort of in the back in the day. So it very much looks like Trump's just sort of having a big man baby tantrum, and democracy's at the core of it. I don't necessarily favour the prospect that actually Trump is doing this in order to help the Senate, because I don't think Trump cares about the Senate. I think Trump cares about Trump. I suspect that there's the long list of people who've been keeping an eye on the fairly unusual and highly probably law-breaking hegemony laws, with his family being so closely involved while they've got business dealings. I suspect there's a very good chance that the entire Trump clan is heading up the heading up the road to a penitentiary somewhere near you, if they're not careful.
Goodbye and stay well.
Sorry, that's my Bixby. So yeah, I think that I think that a lot of what Trump is doing is partly because he can't bear to recognise that he's a big loser, and I very much lauded the mayor who said he needed to put his big boy pants on and face reality.
Well, we come back to Scotland now, and for July to September 2020, Scotland's employment rate estimate rose over the quarter to 74%, and the unemployment rate estimate was unchanged over the quarter at 4.5%, according to a report by the Office for National Statistics today. Separate HMRC early estimates for October 2020 show there were 2.3 million payrolled employees in Scotland, decreasing by 3.1% compared with October 2019. Commenting on the report, Minister for Business, Fair Work and Skills, Jamie Hepburn, said, "I welcome the Chancellor's positive but long overdue announcement last week that he will extend the job retention scheme until March 2021. We repeatedly urged the UK government to safeguard jobs by guaranteeing that this support would be available for as long as employers need it. However, I am aware that some businesses will have already taken the difficult decision to make people redundant because of the unnecessary confusion caused by the UK government and the expectation that the furlough scheme would be withdrawn. This continues to be a hugely worrying time for people, and the Scottish government is doing everything it can to support them through this crisis. We recently announced the first organisation to back our £60 million Young Persons Guarantee, giving young people the chance to succeed by ensuring everyone aged between 16 and 24 has the opportunity of work, education or training." So, Ronnie, coming to you on this, what do you make of these comments from Jamie Hepburn? I mean, is he right to point to the delays in announcing that the furlough scheme was going to be extended for some of the loss of jobs that we've seen in Scotland recently?
It's undoubtedly a factor. You'd have to go down to every individual company and ask them why they're laying people off, and I think a lot of them will say it's what we don't know. It's the uncertainty. Employers, businesses love certainty. They love to be able to plan for decades. But if we do it for a year, for 6 months, or 3 months, that helps. And the situation where furlough was withdrawn, a lot of people just got to the end of their tether and they thought, well, this is it. We don't have the support anymore. What can we do? And behind that, as we always say, behind all the stats, there's jobs, there's individuals, there's people who are losing their jobs. It's 74,000 down. Now, these are families that are going to be hit by this and hit by this hard. So the Scottish Government are doing everything it possibly can to spread what we've got around and maintain as many companies and many organisations as we can. But ultimately, as we know, many of the levers for these financial levers are required still sit at Westminster, and any doubt about what they're going to use them for leads to companies feeling insecure, and they will have to protect their bigger picture. Will they survive, or do they have to let people go? And that's the hard decisions they're having to make. And many years ago, I was made redundant, and I know what it feels like. It hurts like hell, and it digs really into you, and it can take a long time to go over it. And in this situation, I think the real story here, away from the stats, is the people behind it who are losing their job because of this. So if the UK government could have said a month ago, 2 months ago, do you know what? It's going to hurt, but we will take on that hit, and we will extend furlough through into, as it's now saying, to next March. Then they should have done that. Why they thought they could get away with not doing that is beyond me. They already knew the figures for COVID were increasing. We knew we're heading back into lockdowns. We've been predicting this for the first wave, that there was going to be a second wave in the autumn and winter. So none of this should have come as a surprise to them. So they should have been making plans which people could have then worked around. Then we can debate the amount of money and where it's going to come from. But to actually say we're going to end the furlough scheme And that's what we're going to be doing throughout the United Kingdom. We're going to have to slowly roll back on that. Really, it is, it's negligent. It's negligent, and the people who are paying the prices are not just the employers and the companies who are having to let people go, but the actual people who have lost their jobs.
Well, we move on now to another jobs story, and Petroineos plans to mothball nearly half of its 200,000 barrel per day refinery at Grangemouth, the latest plant to scale back operations due to a coronavirus-related drop in demand and a weak long-term outlook for oil consumption. The company plans to shut down its 65,000 barrel per day crude distillation unit 1, as well as the 25,000 barrel per day fluidized catalytic cracker unit, which is used to produce petrol, the company said today. It said the proposal, which the workers' union Unite Scotland said meant a potential loss of 200 jobs, had been put forward to its employees. The two units were already closed due to the COVID-19 pandemic that has cut fuel demand, it added. Unite said it has asked the company to use the 5-month extension of the British government's furlough scheme to provide time to find an alternative. Ruth, I'll come to you on this. Obviously, this is not directly related to the cut in furlough or the issues that Ronnie was discussing, but there are a lot of parts of the economy where demand has been depressed, and that does clearly affect the oil industry. What do you make of this announcement today?
Well, my family's got very close connections with the oil and gas sector, so we sort of see it from a range of perspectives. Sort of dealing with actually sort of pipelines at the planning stage, and it's very interesting in a depressing kind of a way, because you're looking at people's jobs and livelihoods, and yeah, when you're looking at a situation where people are losing jobs, generally, that's tough. When you're looking at a situation where people are losing jobs and they don't know what chance they have of getting another one, that's really scary for a lot of families. That's really tough because what do you do, especially if you come into the category that you don't qualify for any kind of financial support. There's an awful lot of people right now, the sort of up where I am in Aberdeen, in Angus. There's quite a lot of folk who work up in Aberdeenshire, and the my local food hub tells me that they've already got people that they deliver to, houses they deliver to, really swanky houses with two Audis in the driveway, and they're needing food parcels because they've got no income. So it's not easy. None of this is easy, and for those families, it's going to be a really worrying and devastating time. The other side of the coin is my little, the green part of my heart thinks, well, perhaps this shows we can do things another way. Perhaps we shouldn't be, perhaps we should be looking at finding alternatives. And I've been listening to some really interesting discussions today about how, for example, in America, there is talk that with Biden, a lot of folk within the sort of petrogas sector are really worried about losing their jobs. However, the upside of that is that if they get retrained, there's a huge, there's thought that Biden, for example, will end up investing more in the offshore wind sector, and those areas are going to need, in order to bring the hydrogen onshore, there's going to be a whole new industry in developing, for example, pipelines to bring in hydrogen. So I think that it would be really nice to see Ineos, which is one of the wealthiest companies in Scotland, I believe. It'd be really nice to see them retraining those folk that they're letting go in renewables and helping them to find jobs in the renewable sector. Perhaps that's a way around it. Perhaps government. I don't know if it's something the Scottish government can do, and I'm fairly sure it's something that the sort of neoliberalist conservative government we have in Westminster won't do. But wouldn't it be brilliant if all these companies that have not been paying taxes for many years, that perhaps one might expect to see them paying, would be paying a dividend towards helping retrain people in a sector that has a future and is good for the planet?
Well, we move on now to discuss COVID again. And the COVID self-isolation period in England is expected to be cut from 2 weeks to 10 days after a row involving Professor Chris Whitty and Dominic Cummings, who had been pushing for a more drastic change, according to a report in The Guardian. The reduced quarantine time is to be made possible by increasing the use of rapid tests, for which the UK government has paid more than £500 million, despite the fact that some are not designed to test people without symptoms. It comes amid growing concerns about compliance, with only 11% of people in England abiding fully by the current 2-week self-isolation rule, according to research by King's College London in September. Under the new proposals, people are expected to be allowed to stop self-isolating on the 10th day after coming into contact with an infected person following a negative test, in the hope that this will improve compliance. But if they test positive on that date, they will be asked to continue self-isolating for a further 8 days. The planned change is a compromise hammered out at number 10 after Whitty, England's chief medical officer, rejected proposals instigated by Cummings, the Prime Minister's most senior aide, for a more dramatic cut in the quarantine period, according to a source with knowledge of the discussions. Downing Street did not deny the claims. The governments in Edinburgh, Cardiff and Stormont are being consulted on the new proposal, and their agreement will be needed before the policy can be fully implemented. So what do you make of this, Ronnie, that Dominic Cummings is arguing with the Chief Medical Officer about how to do quarantine properly?
Dominic Cummings is a law unto himself. The idea that he can take issue with the chief medical officer and presume to think that he knows more about a situation, it pretty much sums up the situation. You know, we've got this within number 10 Downing Street, within the Cabinet Office, we've got a group of people who want to make policy, but they're not elected members, they're not even civil servants, they're political appointments, and Dominic Cummings being case number one. And to have them in a normal working government in normal times is awkward enough. For them to advise the government what it should be doing in trade and housing and education and transport, stuff like that, is a frightening thought. The fact that these people can intervene during an epidemic, which is the statistics you read out earlier today, you know, the numbers of people who've died from this, the number of people being infected with this, the fact that the numbers are trending up, that somebody like Dominic Cummings can step in and say, I think 10 days is too much and we should be going for less than that, is quite frightening. And also the fact that we're getting these tests are getting rolled out. I don't know all the details of these, but I've been tested for COVID. Unfortunately, I was negative, but I can tell you that the test was painful. You know, and I thought at the time when I was getting it, if I had to administer this test to a child, and I'm not medically qualified in any way, shape or form, but if I had to administer this test, I don't think I'd have it in my heart to actually carry it out properly, because you've got a sick child and you're pushing this thing up his nose and it's got to go right the way up the top and keep on going till it's hit the nerve ends and it's hurting. And you've got a screaming child doing this. So the effectiveness of these self-tests bothers me considerably. And I'm not surprised we're getting so many results in or negative tests or inconclusive tests or what have you. We need medical people carrying out the tests in a medical environment, and we've got an NHS, we've got doctors, GPs, we've got the clinical professionals, and the idea that people are going to do self-testing really concerns me, because people will say, well, I've had a test that turned out negative, but the outcome is not what we expect if it turns out that they've falsely tested themselves negative, if you see what I mean. So the testing bothers me, that we've got to go for high numbers, but if we expect people just to do it themselves, then I don't think it will be carried out effectively enough. And to have political advisors telling chief medical officers what they should be doing is obviously, you know, the cart before the horse.
Well, we move on to another Dominic Cummings related story. The UK's vaccine czar is to pay almost £700,000 in taxpayers' money on a team of boutique PR consultants whose secretary is a long-time business associate of Dominic Cummings' father-in-law. Over the weekend, it was reported that Kate Bingham, the head of the vaccine task force who reports directly to the Prime Minister, spent more than £670,000 hiring PR consultants from a firm called Admiral Associates. The owner and founding managing director of Admiral Associates is listed in Companies House as Georgie Cameron, whose husband Angus Collingwood Cameron is also listed as secretary. He's also a park manager for Chillingham Castle Wild Cattle Association and a director since 2004, along with Humphrey Wakefield, father-in-law of Cummings. 8 of Cameron's freelance consultants are overseeing Bingham's media strategy. There has been growing disquiet after it was claimed Bingham disclosed confidential data about government investment priorities to US financiers before it emerged that she could personally profit from the launch of an investment fund bankrolled by UK taxpayers. So, Ruth, coming to you on this one. This whole procurement of all kinds of things during the pandemic has been pretty shocking. We've heard of billions of pounds of contracts awarded without tender to friends and other kind of associates of various cabinet ministers. Does this one surprise you at all?
No, and I was thinking about this earlier on because it astonishes me how pathetic my former colleagues, many of my former colleagues are. I'm a journalist to trade, and uh, any one of these scandals that we've seen would have been enough to bring governments down or have people resign. And it just keeps, it's like a revolving door of charm splattering out across our airwaves. And we're just so sort of gobsmacked that it's happening. And just keeps on splattering. And it's wrong on fundamental levels. And I think in many ways it I guess I mean with not with my keep Scotland the brand hat on because it's politically neutral, but with my yes Kareem your hat on, it's doing the job for us in many respects because people in Scotland are looking at this and the corruption is writ so large that it is impossible if you're paying attention to be anything other than sickened by it. There's people dying, there's people losing their job, and you've got a load of Tory crony fat cats lining their pockets, and it just is sickening. It reminds me very much. Many years ago, when I lived in Asia, I lived in Malaysia, and one of the one our neighbouring country Indonesia, one of the politicians there was being asked about why they were doing a logging deal after the Norwegians had paid a significant amount of money to save the forest, but a week before this deal came into the sort of carbon neutral thing. A week before that came in, the Indonesian officials were just rubber stamping 5 years worth of logging, so that actually the Norwegians were paying shed loads of money, thinking that they were sort of offsetting their carbon, but in the end the trees were going to get logged anyway because there's a time scale, and somebody interviewed this Indonesian official, and they said, "Well, why are you doing this?" And he looked at them and he smiled and he said, Whenever anybody gets elected, we know we have 5 years to get rich." And that I look at this current bunch and I think that's just exactly it. It's just all for all these years the sense of great British exceptionalism and we do things right. All it is a veneer. There's a veneer of gentility and a veneer of doing the right thing. And that veneer's just been chipped away over the last few years until all we see before us is the naked horror. And I really hope that there's big change. I really genuinely hope that somebody with the cojones to take them on is keeping count. Ronnie, I hope you're keeping count. I hope somebody somewhere is keeping a record so that when the day comes, there's a lot of people going to jail because they deserve it.
Well, Ronnie, are you
Can
keeping
I can
track?
I
Will you be
briefly comment?
fighting back on this?
Well, this is just the latest. My colleague Richard Thompson, the MP for Gordon, described this as the crony virus. And he's absolutely right. During this coronavirus, we have seen corruption throughout the government contracts. They've been handed out, and people are getting very, very rich and not supplying any service for it. It started through PPE, and it's going throughout the last 9, 10 months. Dido Harding is often quoted as well. Dido Harding seems to be in charge of pretty much everything right now, and she gave £12 billion to Serco. £12 billion to Serco, and if you look in there, there's all sorts of connections between family, relations, friends, and the biggest, the kicker for me is that the anti-corruption champion is John Penrose, who's married to Dido Harding. There's all these wee cohorts within that, and making money is driven these people into positions where it's all about making money. And the government is a really good facilitator for that. And it's not a new thing. COVID has brought it to the surface. It's anything but new. People have been doing it for years. I've been in this programme before, talking about the corruption within the alleged corruption, because I'm not in the House right now, the alleged corruption of the medical cannabis and the cannabis marketplace, where you've got the Home Office Minister who grants a license to her husband to grow it, but nobody else is getting it, and people are investing in a company, or her husband happens to be the chief executive officer. So it's not new. It's been going on for decades. You know, it's probably gone forever. I don't know. But yeah, but I do believe there are people who should be from outside Parliament scrutinising this, and even just publishing this data in a way that the general public can see it and understand it. And I think there would be a kickback from the general public if they knew the money which has been wasted at that level, when we are scrambling around trying to get an extra 20 quid a week on universal credit to stop people having to go to food banks to get fed.
Mm-hmm. Well, we come now to our final story of the day, and this is one that we mentioned earlier. Today, the all-party parliamentary group on gambling-related harm took evidence about gambling harms during the COVID-19 pandemic. The session follows a number of worrying reports about harm caused by gambling during lockdown earlier in the year. The session was a stark reminder of the questions that remain for the UK Department of Culture, Media and Sport, as well as the gambling regulator, as to why stronger measures weren't already in place to protect problem gamblers and reduce gambling-related harms. So, Ronnie, as we said at the top of the show, you're the chair of the all-party parliamentary group on gambling-related harm. So tell us, first of all, how did you come to be chairing that group? And then tell us a bit about what this session was about today.
Well, I'm the vice chair, and I say that because we're chaired by Caroline Harris, who's a Labour MP for Swansea East, and Karen does a magnificent job. But Caroline chairs it, and Ian Duckley-Smith and I both vice chair it. And the three of us together, and there are other elected members involved in it as well, the three of us together have been driving this for some time now, and we do it in a very collegiate fashion. Party politics goes part at the door, and we're looking at problems in our society which have been caused by gambling, and we're working to resolve them. And the reason we have to do it is because the Gambling Commission, whose job it is to do this, simply aren't doing it. They're not regulating the business and getting it to get in line with all things which we see to be sane. So we felt a need to push. Now, originally the group grew out of the fixed odd betting terminals all-party parliamentary group, and with one thing in mind and one thing only, and that was reducing the stake in fixed odd betting terminals from £100 a spin to £2 a spin. But as we were investigating that and gathering evidence, because we do it on an evidence base, we're not anti-gambling, we're just trying to stop the harm. But as we were doing that, and after we'd successfully managed to get that done, dragging the government, kicking and screaming to the table, dragging the industry there because they did not want to go there, but we got that done. But during the process, we understood and we came in contact with a lot of people who had gambling-related harm, and they told us about their experiences. And the things they said to us had to change were things like, setting limits, advertising, gambling with debt, and also at a level where we've got the gaming industry, which is a different register, a different set of legislation, but the gaming industry slips seamlessly into gambling these days, and children are being exposed to loot boxes, so they're grooming the next set of adults to take gambling as the normalisation of gambling, where you can't even go to a football match now and really enjoy it unless you're gambling on it. That's the message they're giving us. So we get pulled into this. I grew into it quite naturally by one investigation about fixed odd betting terminals. And as we spoke to people with lived experience who had experienced gambling-related harms, people who had lost everything, huge amounts of money, and fortunately for them, had managed to drag themselves out of their end, and they were coming to us and giving us evidence and saying these things have got to change, and include things like, the list is almost endless. It really is. VIP rooms where people are cajoled into gambling huge amounts of money, the constant drip of emails and contacts from gambling groups, despite the fact that people have said they don't want to be gambling anymore, they're still being contacted. The attitude of the big gambling 5 companies in the UK is absolutely abhorrent. They see punters as money pits to feed them their massive salaries, and they very rarely stop and take into consideration the welfare of anybody who's filling their pockets. So the APPG is chasing them on a lot of different funds. There's a review of the Gambling Act coming along, and we've managed to already, they've said people will no longer be allowed to bet on credit cards, but there's still areas of debt. You can gamble on overdrafts, so we're going to get after that as well. And and that I think that illustrates my point. We identify one thing and say that's got to stop, but it's a wider picture than that. And the gambling commission have come along, and now the big five have come along and said, "Okay, fine, we get it." Well, why we had to point it out to them in the first place, I don't know. But they're now saying, "Well, we get it. I will stop people gambling with credit cards." But unless we go back to them and say, "Yeah, but they can't, but they shouldn't be able to gamble on overdrafts either." They should be knocking all those things in the head in one sweeping piece of legislation. But we've had to pick our way through absolutely everything and say, and that's going to stop, and that's going to stop, and that's going to change, and we're pulling them there. The Gambling Commission is obviously funded by the gambling industry. Now there are good people working in the commission, of course there are, but when their funding comes from the industry, they're trying to regulate. It makes life difficult for them. So I think a voluntary, oh no, I'll take the word out, voluntary, I don't, a statutory levy on the gambling industry which can fund a commission year in, year out, and we know it's going to be, because right now it's voluntary and that number can fluctuate. So let's make it statutory, and then a gambling commission can project itself 5 or 10 years down the road, saying, okay, we know how many people we can employ, we know what work we can commission, that money's not going to disappear, and then they can come up with the truth, and it can be forced through legislation so as the gambling industry gets in line, because the damage it's doing to society. The number of people, particularly during COVID, which has highlighted this, the number of people who are having suicidal thoughts, the number of people who are actually committing suicide is increasing. It was increasing already, but COVID-19 has in many cases isolated people, and they're gambling more online now. The bookmakers aren't open, but they're going online. Online's a more pernicious product. We can gamble faster, you can lose more money. And once the industry gets you to have an account online, they will target you and come after you and come after you relentlessly to gamble more money. And it's that behaviour which has to change if we're going to change the. I can legislate as much as we like, but the behaviour of the companies has to change, and they have to start treating people a little bit more respect and understanding. And unfortunately, the APPG has had to continue this message. We take an expert advice. I'm not just making this stuff up. It's not something that I've just invented. We talk to people who run gambling clinics like Dr. Henrietta Bowden-Jones, an expert in the field. And we got her on board and said, talk to us. And she gave us this information which would, which really should shame the companies. And it doesn't. And we got all the experts. We got 5 big companies in front of us, and we spoke to their chief executive officers. We tried to make them understand the damage they were doing, and it just sort of rolled off them. The head of
Ronnie,
the
Ronnie, Ronnie, they already know. They know the damage they're doing. That's
Oh
the
yeah,
thing. You can't shame somebody without shame. They know the damage they're doing. They're making a decision. They're choosing to line their pockets. It's the same as the tobacco industry. It's a conscious choice. And but when I left Scotland to go away for 10 years, the only gambling shops there were the wee old man gambling shops with the dark windows and the smoky. Nobody went into them. We came back, and everybody was gambling was everywhere. It was normalised. We've got people making slick adverts, and it's absolutely appalling the amount. You can't turn the telly on without there being gambling adverts, and make it look fun. Do it on the bus. Get a grip. All of this has to. I don't envy you your job, but until we get gambling off the TV screens, off the advertising, it's a constant. You can't turn the telly on without seeing somebody will it all be diamonds? And people seem not to understand that if they're gambling, then if they're gambling online, then it's rigged. It just I can't believe, and yet I can, that we live in a country where gambling has become so normalised, and people are so desperate that they're prepared to throw everything at it. And you've got folk like those people sitting in front of you; they are knowingly robbing folk blind, and it just it has. I mean, I would love to see you stop the whole thing dead. The very fact that Cheltenham Racecourse was open had a super spreader event to allow the certain people to make their buck, even though COVID was running riot. That tells us everything we need to know about the real point of gambling is to make money for a very small pocket of people. And I don't envy your task of trying to stop it, because you're up against the big money and unscrupulous people.
Now, we are very nearly out of time, Ronnie. I know we could probably talk to you about this for hours, but just very quickly, as you said, it is an all-party group. It's not a party political operation. But have you had any positive responses from the government about any of what you're recommending?
No, the Gambling Act is going to get rewritten. There is going to be big changes in the Gambling Act. I'm actually quite confident that a number of things that we're after are going to come through. Our job is to scrutinise it line by line by line, because previously when they agreed to change FOBTs to £2, we thought that what a great victory. Then at the last minute, a few curveballs got thrown into it, and we had to fight very hard. And all credit, not something I often do, give credit to Ian Duncan Smith, but he, because of the connections he's got and the phone calls he could make, he made it absolutely clear to the government they were not backing out of this, and it was going to go through. And that's what helps. It helps you've got people in that position who agree with you in something, and you can vote. You can bring the power to bear on the people that make the decisions. So we will go through whatever the Gambling Act comes up with. We will go through it line by line by line and make sure that they haven't just ticked the boxes we've asked them to tick. They've gone beyond that, and a lot of it is about provision of healthcare. So as GPs and people can be trained for early intervention and recognise a problem. If you go to a doctor right now, a GP with the best will in the world, and you're feeling depressed or something like that, they might ask you how much you're drinking. They might ask you if you're taking drugs. It's unlikely to ask you if you're gambling or how much money you're losing. So we have to have an education programme as well, and advertising. Football shirts, corrupted the game, destroyed it in my view, where young kids go to football matches and they need to have a shirt with a betting company on it, or even if the club will sell you one without it, they see their heroes wearing them day in, day out. That's eating away into those kids' heads. It's normalising it. I heard a story last week of a young girl who had a teddy bear and she called it Betaway because she'd just seen this phrase on the football shirt of her football team. And Betaway was just a word to her. A young kid with her teddy bear, and she thought it was a nice thing to do. She called her teddy bear Betaway. That's eating into the minds of kids and normalising the gambling process from a very early age. And because of that, we're getting an increasing problem here. And gambling is a hidden killer within our society. And we've got to do, and it's growing all the time, and we've got to do something about it. And we've got to be as hard on that as we were in tobacco advertising back in the day. We've got to get it off our television screens, get it off our sports products, and educate people about the damage the product can potentially do to you.
Well, Ronnie, I do hope you'll come back and talk to us about this again another time, but that is absolutely all we have time for tonight. So thank you very much to Ruth Watson and to Ronnie Cowan. And thank you to you at home for joining us as well. The shows would be pointless without you, so thank you very much for joining us. If you would like to support Broadcasting Scotland, we would ask you to please go to broadcastingscotland.scot/register, sign up there as a supporter, and your £5 a month is what keeps Broadcasting Scotland going. In all the efforts we make to build a better broadcaster for Scotland, is your money that makes that possible. So if you can help us, please do. If you can't, we do absolutely understand, and the shows will always be free to view online. You don't need to worry about that. But you can still make a big difference for us by following us on Twitter at Broadcast Scot, by liking our Facebook page, and then also by subscribing to our YouTube channel and clicking the bell icon there. It just helps us with the algorithms on all of these social media platforms. But it also then gives you the opportunity to share these shows around with your friends and family, let them know why you support Broadcasting Scotland, and try and encourage them to give us a try as well. We would love to build our audience, and you're the easiest way for us to do that. And finally, we would also like to grow our worker base here at the studio and around the country. If you're interested in any way in getting involved in producing TV, whether as a journalist, as a tech behind the cameras or on the sound desk, or whether you'd like to try sitting in this seat here and host a show, then we would love to hear from you. Again, this doesn't have to be based in Glasgow. A lot of these jobs can be done all over the country. So do please get in touch with us if you're interested in getting involved. But that is all we have time for tonight. So I will be back again tomorrow at 7. But until then, thanks once again to Ronnie Cowan and to Ruth Watson. Thank you again for joining us, and we'll see you soon. Good night. That was great.